Still poor. My ex-wife asked me that in the valet line of a luxury resort, while a kid barely old enough to shave reached for the keys to my 12-year-old Ford F-150. The funny thing is, I almost laughed. Not because it was clever. Honestly, Vanessa had always been sharper than that. But because she said it with the same expression she used 2 years earlier when she signed our divorce papers, calm, certain, already emotionally gone. I remember looking past her shoulder toward the entrance of the Omni Barton Creek Resort outside Austin. White flowers everywhere. String lights wrapped around the trees. Valets jogging around in black polos, like the world might collapse if a Mercedes waited longer than 30 seconds. Then I looked back at her. Vanessa still knew how to dress for a room. Cream-colored silk dress. Gold earrings. Hair pinned up neatly. Expensive but understated enough to whisper old money instead of screaming new money. She folded her arms lightly. "Truck still running?" she asked. "Most days." That earned a small smile from her. Not warm, more like confirmation. I hadn't seen her in person since the divorce hearing downtown. 2 years, 3 months, maybe 4. Long enough for people to become stories instead of people. She glanced toward the parking area. "You know there's complimentary luxury transport from the airport now." I drove. Clearly. There it was again. That edge. I should probably explain something. Vanessa wasn't cruel in the cartoon villain way people online love talking about. She didn't throw plates, or cheat with the pool guy, or empty bank accounts. What she did was worse, at least for me. She stopped believing in me slowly. And once that happened, every conversation started sounding like an exit interview. Back when I was still working cybersecurity at NetBridge Solutions in Austin, life looked pretty good from the outside. 6-figure salary, nice house in Cedar Park, season tickets for Texas football, retirement accounts, annual vacations in places where drinks came with tiny umbrellas nobody actually wanted. Then I quit. 45 years old, making more money than my father ever dreamed of, and I walked away from it because I thought I had one great idea left in me. A logistics fraud detection platform. Not sexy, not flashy. No social media nonsense. Just software designed to detect internal theft and routing manipulation inside freight systems. I used my inheritance from my parents and every dollar I'd personally saved before marriage. Around $280,000 altogether. Vanessa never funded the company, never paid my employees, never covered payroll. I made sure of that. At first she admired it. Or maybe she admired the version of me that still looked confident while doing it. That part gets blurry now. 3 years later, the company still wasn't profitable. I was exhausted. Our marriage was hanging by dental floss, and Vanessa finally decided she was done waiting for my breakthrough. Now she was marrying Grant Whitmore Jr. The Whitmores were Texas money in the way people in Texas immediately recognize. Logistics, energy investments, shipping contracts, political donations. The kind of family where buildings get named after dead relatives. I almost threw the wedding invitation away when it came. Actually, I did throw it away. Then I dug it out of the kitchen trash later that night, after 2 bourbons and half a frozen pizza. I wish I could tell you I attended, because I'd healed and moved on, and wanted closure, like some mature divorced man in a pharmaceutical commercial. Truth was uglier than that. Part of me still wanted to know whether she ever regretted leaving. That's why I came. And standing there in the valet circle with live jazz floating out from the courtyard, and Vanessa quietly measuring my life through the condition of my truck, I already regretted it. She tilted her head slightly. So she said, still consulting. Something like that. Then came the line. Still poor. I smiled a little. Before I could answer, a voice behind her suddenly boomed across the driveway. Ethan Cole. Vanessa turned first. An older man in a navy suit was walking toward us, fast enough that one of the younger executives beside him nearly collided with a flower arrangement, trying to keep up. Harold Whitmore, Grant's father. I recognized him immediately from business magazines and LinkedIn interviews I'd watched at 2 in the morning while debugging code. The man walked straight past his future daughter-in-law, straight toward me. Then he grabbed my hand with both of his. "Jesus Christ," he said. "Do you know how many people I've had trying to track you down?" I honestly thought he had mistaken me for somebody else. "I'm sorry. Our procurement people have been trying to get a meeting with your company for months." He laughed once. "You software guys are harder to reach than senators." Behind him, 2 executives suddenly looked interested. Vanessa's expression changed so subtly most people wouldn't have caught it. But I knew her face better than anybody for nearly 20 years. Confusion first, then calculation, then something close to panic. Harold kept talking. "That fraud detection platform your company built. We've heard impressive things." I could feel Grant approaching behind us now. "You know Ethan?" Grant asked carefully. Harold looked genuinely surprised. "You do too, apparently." There was a strange silence after that. Not dramatic, not movie silence. Just the uncomfortable kind where everybody suddenly realizes they walked into a conversation already in progress. Grant extended his hand toward me, firm grip, polished smile. "Grant Whitmore?" "Ethan Cole." Vanessa finally spoke. "You never told me your company was doing well." I looked at her for a second. Then toward the resort, lights glowing against the Texas hill country sky. Truthfully, I didn't know what hurt more. That she asked the question, or that a part of me still cared. The first year after I left NetBridge felt a little like standing on the edge of a diving board too long. Exciting at first, then nauseating. I rented a tiny office above a tire shop off North Lamar Boulevard in Austin because it was cheap and the owner didn't care if we worked late. The place always smelled faintly like burnt rubber and stale coffee. Summer heat pushed through the windows, no matter how hard the old air conditioner fought back. But I loved it, at least in the beginning. I hired 2 younger developers, smart kids, hungry. One from Houston, one from San Antonio. We built whiteboards full of architecture diagrams and convinced ourselves we were creating something that would change freight security forever. Back then, Vanessa still believed in me. Mostly. She'd stop by the office after work sometimes, carrying takeout containers from this Thai place she liked near the domain. She'd look around at the mismatched desks and exposed wiring and smile politely. "It smells illegal in here," she once said. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled coffee on a server tower. That was year 1. Hope covers a lot of problems early on. By year 2, Hope starts sending unpaid bills. I stopped taking a salary completely. My inheritance money kept shrinking while development costs kept growing. Cloud storage bills, contractors, licensing fees, legal paperwork. Every month felt like getting mugged by invisible people. Meanwhile, life kept happening. Property taxes didn't care about my startup dreams. Insurance premiums didn't pause because I was building something. My father-in-law needed surgery around that time. Vanessa started flying to Dallas more often to help her parents. I could tell she was embarrassed talking about me around her family. Not because I was broke, exactly. Because I looked broke. There's a difference. I gained weight from stress and fast food. Stopped shaving regularly. Started wearing the same faded University of Texas hoodie 3 days in a row without noticing. One night, Vanessa walked into the kitchen holding a mortgage statement. She didn't say anything at first. Just set it down near my laptop while I was working. "You didn't tell me we were late." I was handling it. "With what money, Ethan?" "I've got it." That answer used to reassure her once. Not anymore. We ate dinner mostly in silence that night. Store-bought rotisserie chicken, microwave rice, local news playing softly in the background, while some meteorologist warned everybody about another 100-degree weekend coming through Central Texas. At one point, Vanessa looked over at my laptop screen. "You're working during dinner again." "I'm listening." "No, you're waiting for me to stop talking." That one landed because it was true. I wasn't an easy man to live with during those years. I know that now. People love simple stories, where one spouse becomes the villain, and the other becomes a misunderstood genius. Real marriages usually die slower than that, more quietly. I missed anniversaries, forgot conversations, fell asleep with spreadsheets open on my chest. Sometimes Vanessa would wake up at 2 in the morning and find me sitting alone at the kitchen table staring at server logs like they personally offended me. The company became the third person in our marriage, eventually the most important one. By year 3, things really started breaking apart. One investor backed out after 6 months of negotiations, told me the product was technically impressive but commercially uncertain. That phrase almost gave me an aneurysm. Then one of my developers left unexpectedly and took pieces of unfinished code with him. Nothing fully operational, but enough to hurt. I remember sitting alone in that office after midnight, staring at empty desks, while thunder rattled the windows outside. For the first time, quitting sounded peaceful. Friends started calling with job openings. Dell's hiring again. You could walk into Oracle tomorrow. Man, you already proved your point. I actually interviewed with Dell. Senior security architecture role. Good salary. Benefits. Predictable life. The hiring manager slid an offer packet across the table at their Round Rock campus while explaining stock incentives. I almost took it. Honestly, if one thing had gone differently that week, I probably would have. But 3 nights later, around 1:30 in the morning, my fraud detection engine finally worked properly during stress testing. No crash. No false routing duplication. No data corruption. I just sat there staring at the monitor while the system processed shipment anomalies in real time exactly the way I'd imagined years earlier. I remember whispering, "Holy hell," then laughing alone in the office like a crazy person. I drove home before sunrise, feeling lighter than I had in months. Vanessa was already awake in the kitchen drinking coffee. I told her probably too excited, way too technical. It finally scaled. She blinked at me. "That's good. It's huge. I'm glad." But her voice sounded tired, distant, like she'd already emotionally moved out months earlier. A few weeks later, we had the conversation that ended everything. No screaming. No dramatic betrayal. That almost would have been easier. She stood near the sink folding dish towels while I leaned against the counter pretending not to panic. "I can't do this forever," she said quietly. "I know things are hard right now. It's been hard for 3 years. I'm close. You've been close for 3 years too." I rubbed my face. "I never asked you to pay for any of this." She nodded slowly. "You're right, you didn't." There was a long silence after that. Then she finally said the thing that stuck with me. "You disappeared into this company long before I left the marriage." I wanted to argue. Couldn't. Because somewhere deep down, I knew exactly what she meant. The divorce itself felt strangely efficient. 2 middle-aged people dividing a life into paperwork and signatures. No kids complicated things. Maybe that made it cleaner. Or sadder. 4 months later, after the divorce, finalized a regional freight company in Oklahoma, tested my platform during an internal audit. Within 48 hours, the system uncovered nearly $2 million in hidden shipment manipulation tied to 3 employees. After that, word spread slowly. Then all at once. Funny how success works like that. People call you lucky after ignoring you for years. By the time the wedding invitation arrived from Vanessa and Grant, my company finally had momentum. Real contracts. Real revenue. Real attention from people who previously wouldn't return my calls. But none of that changed one uncomfortable truth. Success showed up after my marriage was already buried. And the strange part, some nights even after everything improved, I still woke up expecting to hear Vanessa moving around the kitchen. I woke up the morning of the wedding with a stiff neck and a pounding headache from hotel bourbon that cost $18 a glass. Outside my room, the resort was already alive. Golf carts humming down the paths, staff arranging flower displays, somebody somewhere testing microphones for the ceremony. Texas wedding money starts working before sunrise. I stood by the window for a minute, looking out over the hills west of Austin. Dry grass, Early heat already rising off the stone walkways. A few men in expensive golf shirts laughing too loudly near the clubhouse patio. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered with the same voice every middle-aged man uses when he doesn't recognize a number and assumes it might be medical billing. Hello. Mr. Cole, this is Harold Whitmore. That woke me up fast. I hope I'm not bothering you, he said. Would you have time for breakfast before the ceremony activities start? I hesitated. Not because I didn't know the answer, because I knew exactly what the meeting was about. Business. And business around wealthy families always gets messy faster than people think. Still, curiosity won. 40 minutes later, I walked into the golf clubhouse restaurant wearing jeans and a navy button-down, while every other man there looked ready for a political fundraiser. Harold stood when he saw me. He was older up close than he appeared in magazines. Mid-70s probably. Broad shoulders that age hadn't fully taken yet. Firm handshake. Expensive watch without being flashy about it. That generation of wealthy Texans always fascinated me. Men who could buy half the room, but still ordered plain black coffee. Ethan, he said warmly, appreciate you coming. No problem. He waved me toward the table overlooking the course. For a minute we talked about harmless things. Austin traffic, summer heat, construction ruining downtown. The usual middle-aged man warm-up routine before getting to the point. Then he leaned back slightly. My executives tell me your software platform is causing problems for competitors. I smiled faintly. That sounds dramatic. It's meant as a compliment. Breakfast arrived. Eggs, bacon, toast I barely touched. Harold got right into it after that. Whitmore Freight Systems had been quietly dealing with internal fraud issues for almost 2 years. Shipment rerouting, inventory manipulation, internal leaks costing millions. We've thrown consultants at it, he said. Cybersecurity firms, internal audits. None of it solved the actual problem. And now your platform keeps coming up in conversations we don't enjoy hearing. I laughed once. That surprised him. Sorry, I said. Just funny hearing that after the last few years. He studied me carefully then. You built this company from scratch. Mostly. How many employees now? 22. He nodded slowly like he was recalculating something privately. You know, he said, most people your age stop gambling professionally. Most people my age enjoy sleeping too. That got a real laugh out of him. For the first time that morning, the conversation relaxed a little. Then everything shifted accidentally. A waitress came by refilling coffee and asked whether my wife would be joining us later for wedding events. Before I could answer, Harold casually said, "Oh, Ethan's not with the bride's side." The waitress looked confused. Harold looked at me. And suddenly I realized. He still didn't know. I set my coffee down carefully. Vanessa's my ex-wife. The silence after that lasted maybe 2 seconds. But it felt longer. Harold blinked once, then leaned back slowly in his chair. Well, he muttered, that certainly complicates dinner seating. I couldn't help it. I laughed harder than I had in weeks. To his credit, he laughed too. But underneath it, I could see discomfort settling into him. Not hostility, just realization. Pieces clicking together. That explains her expression last night, he said finally. She had an expression. She looked like somebody finding out their old house doubled in value after they sold it. I looked down at my coffee because that one hit a little too accurately. Harold cleared his throat. For whatever it's worth, I had no idea. I figured. And Grant. No idea there either. Harold rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. Well, that boy's morning just became considerably more interesting. For the next half hour, we talked business seriously. The strange thing is, despite everything, I still felt more comfortable discussing software architecture than my own divorce. Whitmore Freight wanted a long-term enterprise partnership, multi-year rollout, fraud detection integration across regional systems, potentially worth tens of millions over time. But the important part wasn't the money anymore. It was the fact that people finally took the company seriously. 3 years earlier, I'd been eating vending machine peanuts in an overheated office, wondering whether I'd destroyed my life permanently. Now, billion-dollar companies were chasing meetings. Funny world. As we wrapped up breakfast, Harold checked his phone and frowned slightly. My son's already asking where I disappeared to. Probably not ideal on rehearsal weekend. Nothing about wealthy families is ideal, he said dryly. We stood and shook hands. Then he paused. You seem surprisingly calm about all this. I thought about that honestly. I'm trying very hard not to become the kind of man who needs revenge to feel successful. Harold looked at me a long moment after that, then nodded once. Fair answer. I left the clubhouse and walked back toward the resort courtyard, just as wedding guests started gathering for afternoon events. That's when I saw Vanessa again. She was standing near the outdoor bar speaking with two women I vaguely remembered from years ago. The moment she noticed me, her posture changed almost invisibly. Not flirtatious exactly. Careful. The women drifted away after a moment, leaving us alone near the stone railing overlooking the hills. You had breakfast with Harold, she asked. Seems that way. She folded her arms lightly. I didn't realize your company got that big. It didn't happen overnight. No, she said quietly. I guess it didn't. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then she asked the question I think she'd been holding in since yesterday. Why didn't you ever tell me things finally worked out? I looked at her. Really looked at her. The woman I spent almost 20 years beside suddenly seemed unfamiliar and deeply familiar at the same time. Finally, I answered honestly. You stopped wanting updates a long time ago. She looked away first. By late afternoon, the entire resort had shifted into wedding mode. Music drifting across the courtyard. Caterers moving trays around like synchronized swimmers. Bridesmaids carrying emergency makeup bags with the seriousness of trauma nurses. I stayed mostly out of the way. That was my plan from the beginning. Show up. Be polite. Leave before the emotional weather turned ugly. But the problem with wealthy families is they treat business opportunities like blood in the water. Around 4 o'clock, one of Harold's executives found me near the coffee stand outside the ballroom. Mr. Whitmore was hoping to steal 5 minutes later. He said, "Steal or bill?" The guy blinked twice before realizing I was joking. Middle management humor rarely survives corporate life. I grabbed a black coffee and wandered outside toward the terrace overlooking the hill country. The heat had finally started easing up. Warm wind moving through the oak trees. Somewhere below, cicadas screamed like broken electrical equipment. Texas soundtrack. That's where Grant found me. He walked over carrying a whiskey glass, even though it wasn't even dinner yet. Expensive suit. Perfect hair. Relaxed smile practiced in mirrors for years. I feel like I should officially welcome you, he said. You already shook my hand yesterday. True. He leaned casually against the railing beside me. For a minute, we just watched golfers finishing late rounds in the distance. Then he finally said it. My father seems very interested in your company. Seems that way. He gets excited about new toys. I took a sip of coffee. My software detects organized freight fraud. Not exactly a toy. Grant smiled slightly. Fair enough. There it was. That tiny edge underneath the charm. I'd spent decades around executives and engineers. You learn pretty quickly that some people insult you directly, while others wrap it in polished language first. Grant belonged to the second category. You know, he continued startup founders usually love attention more than actual business operations. I looked over at him. You saying that as an investor, or as the groom? That earned the first genuine reaction from him, all conversation. Small pause. Small tightening around the mouth. Then the smile came back. Just making conversation. No, you weren't. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then surprisingly, Grant chuckled. Okay, he admitted, maybe not. At least he was honest about being dishonest. That almost made him more likable. Almost. Before things could turn uglier, Vanessa appeared through the terrace doors. You two behaving? She asked lightly. Grant kissed her cheek automatically. We're discussing the fascinating world of shipping fraud. God help me, she muttered. But I noticed something immediately. Her eyes kept drifting toward me. Not romantic, not even hopeful exactly. More like somebody mentally reopening old files they thought were already archived. Grant noticed too. Men always notice eventually. A wedding coordinator called Vanessa away a moment later, leaving Grant and me alone again. His pleasant expression faded almost immediately once she disappeared. You know, he said quietly, showing up here, like this is a little strange. I was invited. You could have declined. I considered it. Probably should have. There it was, finally. Not polished anymore. Just territorial. I set my coffee down on the railing. Grant, I'm not here for Vanessa. Good. But I don't think you're worried about that. His jaw tightened slightly. Interesting. Because I was right. This wasn't really about jealousy. It was about control. Men raised around power often mistake control for safety. And suddenly Grant didn't control the room anymore. Not fully. That bothered him. After he walked away, I stayed outside longer than necessary, trying to calm myself down. I didn't want conflict. That part's important. People listening to stories like this always imagine revenge feels exciting in the moment. Truth is, most of the time it feels exhausting, especially at my age. I didn't want to spend an entire wedding weekend mentally wrestling with my past. But life rarely asks what mood you're in before creating problems. About an hour later, Harold asked me to join him briefly in one of the private conference rooms near the ballroom. 2 executives were already inside looking tense. That's when things took a turn I hadn't expected. One executive slid a folder toward me. We've been reviewing an incident from several months ago, he said carefully. Inside were contractor records, access logs, vendor communications, and one familiar company name. I stared at it for several seconds before leaning back slowly in my chair. Well, that explained some things. Months earlier, during beta testing, someone attempted unauthorized access to portions of my platform through a third-party integration contractor. We blocked it quickly. At the time, I assumed it was ordinary corporate snooping. Apparently not. The contractor had indirect ties to Whitmore operations, more specifically to a subsidiary Grant supervised personally. Harold looked furious in the controlled way wealthy older men often do. Quiet. Dangerous. You believe my son was involved, he asked. I believe somebody around him got too aggressive. That answer mattered. Because the truth probably wasn't cartoon villain simple. I doubted Grant personally sat behind a keyboard trying to steal source code. More likely, he pushed people too hard, wanted leverage, wanted early access, wanted to impress his father. Corporate environments create morally flexible people all the time. Still wrong, still ugly, but believable. One executive spoke carefully. There's no evidence of direct criminal intent. Good, I said. Let's keep it that way. Harold watched me closely after that. You could make this very public. I could. And I thought about Vanessa downstairs preparing to marry into this family. Thought about my own company finally stabilizing after years of hell. Thought about how easy bitterness becomes if you feed it long enough. I haven't decided yet. That evening, just before guests moved toward the ballroom, Vanessa found me alone near the outdoor fire pits. The sun was setting behind the hills, orange light catching the edges of her hair. She looked nervous for the first time all weekend. Grant says something happened with Harold. I didn't answer immediately. She stepped closer. Ethan, what's going on? I rubbed my hands together slowly. Nothing that can't be handled. That's not an answer. No, I agreed. It isn't. She studied my face quietly. Then finally said the thing I think she'd been carrying around since yesterday. If things had worked out sooner, maybe we would have made it. That hurt more than I expected. Not because I believed it. Because part of her probably did. I looked out toward the darkening hills before answering. I spent 3 years risking my own future, I said. Quietly. You still couldn't wait through those years. Vanessa's eyes dropped. No defense. No anger. and somehow that felt heavier than a fight would have. A few minutes later, I walked back inside carrying the contractor folder under my arm. As I passed Harold near the ballroom entrance, I handed it to him. His face hardened after reading the top page. Then he looked toward his son across the crowded room. And I knew the wedding weekend had officially stopped being about marriage. If you've never been inside a wealthy Texas wedding reception, let me save you the trouble. Everything looks relaxed. Nothing actually is. By 7:30 that evening, the ballroom at Barton Creek looked like a magazine, spread somebody spent $500,000 trying to impress strangers with. White roses hanging from ceiling beams, soft jazz near the dance floor, waiters carrying bourbon glasses like sacred objects. And underneath all of it, tension thick enough to chew. You could feel it if you paid attention. Executives whispering near the bar, Grant disappearing twice with his father, Vanessa smiling too long during conversations because her brain was clearly somewhere else. I should have left before dinner. Honestly, I tried. I even walked toward the valet corridor once, ready to get in my truck and drive back to Austin before the entire evening collapsed under its own weight. Then Harold appeared beside me near the hallway outside the ballroom. "Don't leave yet," he said quietly. That alone told me how serious things had become. Men like Harold Whitmore don't ask. They instruct. But tonight he sounded tired. Older. "What happened?" I asked. He exhaled slowly. "My son made decisions he shouldn't have. That's between you and him." "Not entirely." We stood there in silence, while guests laughed somewhere behind the ballroom doors. Finally, Harold spoke again. "You understand what bothers me most." I shook my head. He risked reputation for shortcuts. His jaw tightened. "That's weakness, pretending to be ambition." That line stayed with me, because he wasn't really talking about software anymore. A wedding coordinator suddenly rushed past us, carrying extra place cards like national security depended on table assignments. Life keeps moving even when people's futures crack apart. Funny thing about the world. Harold straightened his jacket. "I'll handle it." Then he walked back toward the ballroom. I remained in the hallway another minute, trying to decide whether I'd done the right thing. Part of me still hated this. Not exposing the contractor issue. That needed to happen. What I hated was the timing. Vanessa was getting married tonight. No matter how complicated our history became, I never truly wanted to humiliate her publicly. That distinction matters. Revenge sounds satisfying in theory. In reality, once real emotions get attached, things become murkier. I finally returned to the ballroom just as dinner service started. Grant stood near the head table greeting guests with a smile that looked physically painful now. Vanessa beside him, in a fitted ivory gown, beautiful and visibly distracted. For a brief second, our eyes met across the room. Then she looked away. Dinner moved awkwardly. Not disastrous, just strained in subtle ways older adults recognize immediately. The father of the groom's speech got shortened. 2 executives left early after receiving phone calls. Grant drank more than he should have. Nobody said anything directly, but conversations kept dying whenever certain people approached the table. Corporate silence, one of the deadliest sounds on earth. About halfway through dinner, Grant finally snapped. Not loudly. That's what made it uncomfortable. He approached my table carrying another whiskey and sat down across from me without invitation. A few nearby guests suddenly became very interested in their salads. Grant smiled thinly. "You enjoying yourself?" "I've had worse weekends." "Glad to hear it." I could smell bourbon on him now. Not sloppy drunk, just emotionally careless. He leaned closer. "You know what's funny? Guys, like you always pretend success makes you humble." I stayed calm. Guys like me. Middle-aged startup martyrs. He smiled without warmth. "You all want people to admire the struggle." I looked at him carefully before answering. "You don't actually know anything about my struggle." Something flickered behind his eyes then. Anger maybe, or embarrassment. Hard to tell sometimes with rich men raised around competition. "You could have stayed away tonight," he said quietly. And you could have stayed away from my beta platform 6 months ago. That landed. Hard. His entire face changed. Not dramatic shock, worse. Recognition. He knew exactly what I meant. For a second, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Grant leaned back slowly in his chair. You don't know what you're talking about. I know enough. Nearby conversations had nearly stopped now. Not because people heard specifics, because humans instinctively recognize danger in body language. Grant lowered his voice further. You trying to embarrass me? Number. Sure looks like it. I looked around the ballroom. The flowers, the candles. Vanessa talking nervously with one of her bridesmaids near the dance floor. Then back at Grant. You embarrassed yourself, I said calmly. I just refused to ignore it. That's when Harold appeared behind him. I'll give the old man credit. He didn't raise his voice once all evening. Grant, he said evenly. Walk with me. His son didn't move immediately. Then Harold added 4 words that changed the entire atmosphere around us. Now, not later. Grant stood slowly. As they walked away, I noticed several executives quietly watching from across the ballroom. Nobody returned to normal conversation afterward, because everybody understood. Not details, just hierarchy shifting in real time. About 20 minutes later, I finally headed outside for air. Warm night. Crickets screaming in the dark hills. Valet station lights glowing against rows of expensive cars. Vanessa followed me out a minute later. Neither of us spoke immediately. She wrapped her arms around herself against the night breeze, even though it wasn't cold. What happened? She asked finally. I leaned against the stone wall near the entrance. Your future father-in-law asked some difficult questions. And Grant, you should ask him. She stared toward the parking lot for several seconds before speaking again. I used to think stability mattered more than belief. That sentence sounded rehearsed in her head long before she said it aloud. I nodded slowly. You thought struggle meant failure. Her eyes filled slightly, though she never cried. I was tired, Ethan. I know. You stopped seeing me. That's true, too. That was the hardest part. Neither of us got to be completely innocent. A burst of applause sounded from inside the ballroom, probably the band trying desperately to save the mood. Vanessa gave a weak laugh. This is not how I pictured tonight. No, I said softly. Probably not. Then the ballroom doors opened again. Harold stepped onto the terrace with several senior executives behind him. He looked composed, controlled, but final. Conversations near the entrance quieted almost immediately. Harold addressed the executives first, though plenty of guests overheard. Partnership discussions with Cole Adaptive Systems will continue through senior leadership directly. A few people exchanged looks. Then came the second part. Internal matters involving Grant's division require immediate review. That was it. No scandalous speech. No dramatic accusations. But in rooms like this, people understand coded language instantly. Vanessa closed her eyes briefly beside me. And across the ballroom windows, I could see Grant standing alone near the bar, while people slowly stopped approaching him. I left 10 minutes later. No dramatic exit. No victory speech. Just my old truck pulling quietly out of a luxury resort, while country music played softly through cracked speakers. And somewhere during the drive back toward Austin, I realized something strange. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free. 3 weeks after the wedding, I was standing in my backyard burning overcooked ribs, while my neighbor Larry yelled cooking advice over the fence like he was coaching the Super Bowl. Too much heat, he shouted. I know that now. You knew it 5 minutes ago, too. That was the first time I'd laughed hard in a while. Real laughter. The kind that sneaks up on you before you realize your chest feels lighter. Austin was still brutally hot that summer. Dry heat during the day, heavy cicadas at night. The kind of weather where old men stand outside Home Depot discussing lawn care like military strategy. And for the first time in years, my life had slowed down enough for me to notice those things again. Not completely. The company was growing faster than I expected now, We'd signed 2 major regional contracts after the Whitmore weekend, and negotiations with Whitmore Freight officially moved forward through Harold's senior operations team. Professional. Clean. No favors. Honestly, Harold handled the entire situation better than most people would have. Grant disappeared from negotiations completely. From what I heard through industry gossip, he was still technically employed inside the company, but far away from anything involving acquisitions or vendor strategy. Texas business circles are funny that way. Nobody says someone got demoted. They just stop getting invited into important rooms. As for Vanessa, I didn't hear from her at first. Part of me expected some dramatic phone call the night after the reception. Tears, anger, blame. Instead, there was silence. And strangely enough, I respected that. Life returned to ordinary rhythms. I started sleeping normally again. That probably sounds small, but middle-aged stress changes your body in ways younger people don't understand yet. During the startup years, I'd wake up at 3:30 every morning, already anxious. Heart racing before my feet even hit the floor. Now I slept through entire nights sometimes. I started fishing again too. Nothing fancy. Just early mornings outside Bastrop with cheap coffee and a thermos, and absolutely no desire to check email. One Saturday morning, I caught myself sitting quietly by the water for almost 20 minutes, without thinking about work once. That scared me more than the divorce, because I realized how long I'd been mentally absent from my own life. Around that same time, I started volunteering twice a month at a community tech mentoring program in East Austin, mostly helping older adults and laid-off workers learn basic cybersecurity tools and software systems. That's where I met Diane. Not some dramatic movie entrance. Nobody dropped groceries in slow motion. She was helping organize donated laptops when I walked in late, carrying breakfast tacos for volunteers. "Please tell me one of those has bacon," she said. I liked her immediately. Not because she was glamorous, because she sounded tired in an honest way. Turns out she taught high school accounting for 26 years before retiring. Divorced, too. Grown kids. Sharp sense of humor. Didn't care about startup culture or corporate nonsense. Our first conversation lasted 40 minutes and included Texas property taxes, bad knees, barbecue arguments, and why nobody over 50 can understand modern TV remote controls anymore. Normal life. I'd forgotten how much I missed normal life. Then one Tuesday evening, Vanessa finally called. I almost didn't answer. I was sitting alone on my back patio with a bourbon and leftover brisket, watching a thunderstorm roll across the distance. Her voice sounded smaller somehow. "Hi. Hey." A few seconds passed quietly. Then she said I wasn't sure you'd pick up. Neither was I. That actually made her laugh softly. Not much, just enough to remind me of old years before things got complicated. "I heard the Whitmore contract went through," she said. "Mostly. I'm glad." And strangely enough, I believed she meant it. Rain started tapping lightly against the patio roof, while neither of us spoke for a moment. Finally, Vanessa exhaled. "I owe you an apology." "You don't have to do that." "Yes," she said quietly. "I do." I leaned back in the chair and listened. I kept thinking success would eventually prove whether leaving was the right decision, she admitted. But that wasn't really the issue. I stayed silent. Then she said the sentence that probably explained our marriage better than anything else ever could. "I left when your life still looked unfinished." That one sat heavy, because it was honest. Not cruel, not manipulative, just painfully honest. I looked out toward the dark yard, while rain slowly thickened across the fence line. "For what it's worth," I said finally, "I understand why you got tired." "No," she replied softly. "You understand it better now because things worked out." Maybe she was right. Maybe failure feels romantic only after survival. We talked another 10 minutes after that, about ordinary things mostly. Her mother's health, Austin traffic, mutual friends we hadn't seen in years. No talk about getting back together. That chapter had already ended long before the divorce papers arrived. And honestly, that was okay. After we hung up, I sat outside a while longer, listening to rain hit the trees, thinking. For years, I imagined success would feel loud when it finally arrived, like some scoreboard proving everybody wrong. But real success, at least at my age, felt quieter than that. It looked like sleeping peacefully, cooking bad ribs with neighbors, not checking your bank account before buying groceries, having enough air in your chest to enjoy a fishing trip, and maybe most importantly, no longer needing the people who doubted you to regret it. A week later, Diane and I grabbed dinner at a little barbecue place outside Round Rock. Nothing fancy. Paper towels on the tables. Country music too loud. Halfway through the meal, she looked at me and said, "You seem like somebody who spent too many years worrying." I smiled. Probably true. "Well," she said, stealing one of my fries, "you look less worried now." Driving home that night, windows down, warm Texas air rolling through the truck, I realized something I wish I'd understood years earlier. Winning isn't always about becoming richer than the people who walked away. Sometimes it's simply surviving long enough to become yourself again. If you've ever spent years building something nobody else understood, yet then you probably know how lonely that road can feel. And if somebody gave up on you too early, that pain stays a while. But life has a strange way of rewarding persistence quietly years later when you least expect it. Thanks for listening.